President Jacob Zuma is being targeted for his radical transformation agenda and may be facing a threat to his life. Deputy Finance Minister Sifiso Buthelezi made these startling claims at a Des Forum gathering in Pietermaritzburg on Friday. Buthelezi indicated that the groundwork is being done for President Zuma's assassination. He also alleged that those behind this move want to make sure that the president's removal comes across as a logical thing to do. Now, speaking at an event organized by the ANC's Moses Mabhida region, Buthelezi said, and I quote, President Jacob Zuma is being demonized in the same way that Chris Heinie was ahead of his assassination. This is because the president has touched the nerve of a powerful bloc that wants to retain its economic power base. Anti-Zuma forces are threatened by calls for radical economic transformation. He insinuated that the attacks on President Zuma were mounted by the anti-transformation forces. He said that a situation is being created in South Africa that it is correct to kill Zuma.
Of intolerance, because there are people that if people have different views, you can't punish them. Our own constitutional democracy, we thrive in terms of our diversity of opinions, freedom of speech and so forth. That someone who holds a different view on any matter should be intimidated is not acceptable in this country. That people can resort to intimidation, to violence, including killings, irrespective whether they're a public figure or not, because there are matters that don't get reported of South Africans who are suffering in silence.
And now joining me in studio is political analyst Tshepo Khadima and Botsang Mwila. And on the phone line, we have Professor Barry Hanganye, a political analyst. He is also joining us over here with this conversation that will be taking place. A very warm welcome to you and thank you so much for your time, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening, Lesotho.
And now I'm going to start with you, Mr. Khadima. Do you see a merit in Buthelezi's argument that President Zuma is being demonized, similar to how Chris Heinie was before his assassination?
Well, those are the facts, and we have to bear in mind, I said this last week and I want to repeat it now, every good deed will not go unpunished. And what is the good deed to do is to call for equity and fairness in the economy and the wealth of this country. And anybody who does that, the special interests and through moneyed corporations, they will stop at nothing. We know that there is this concerted effort to get rid of President Zuma at all costs and to ensure that every single person who is in leadership of the African National Congress must be answerable to this special interests that by outside forces. I mean, just a week and a half ago, we saw an academic paper, an academic in question, but in quotes, by the way, coming out of the University of Stellenbosch, which the authors admitted that they were funded by the Open Society Foundation of George Soros. And they were not even shameful to admit that they are being funded by George Soros, who it has been proven that everywhere else he goes, he funds regime change agenda. So to then produce such a quality of work, which was supposedly academic in nature, to influence the citizens to view President Zuma as a leader of a failed state, purely because he is calling that we should remedy the imbalances and the injustices of the past. Now, we are talking here on a Sunday evening. Most people would have been to church today. So those that have been to church, I can tell them and remind them that, by the way, restitution is biblical. It is in the Bible that if you take what does not belong to you, you must return it. And therefore, those that have taken the wealth of this country, which did not belong to them, they must return it. And the way to return it is through a radical economic transformation agenda that, by the way, President Zuma now has grown impatient and is wanting to implement, because the African National Congress at its last General Conference in Mangaung, in fact, resolved, not only resolved, but in 2013, at the January 8 statement, they are once again reiterated that call at Moses Mabhida Stadium that they will embark on a radical economic transformation agenda. But what we have seen since that call in 2013, we've seen that most leaders within the African National Congress have tried by all means to shy away from it. And they're having double speak. And there is nothing else unfortunate more so that the Deputy President just this past week could tell the COSATU CEC that, well, he's not so sure about radical economic transformation when he's a deputy president of a party that passed a resolution to that effect, when he's a leader of government business, and government is supposed to be the one that leads radical economic transformation efforts. And so you have to ask, is that, well, is he not conflicted in many ways? And if he's conflicted, why is he staying at the post? But it's certainly not a imagination that President Zuma is being punished for saying we have to implement radical economic transformation right now. And it is indeed true that his life is in danger because those that have possessed the wealth of this country for decades, they will stop at nothing to ensure that they retain it at all costs at the expense of the whole population.
Let me just bring in Professor Barry Heinie into this conversation. Now, Buthelezi says Zuma is being targeted for his pro-transformation agenda. What is your response on this, Professor?
So, good evening. Good evening to the panelists. Good evening to the viewers. I think such statements must be ushered with a bit of evidence to it that really strongly suggests that the president's life is in danger here in one way or another. I still wait to see that coming forward, and what will be the motives for that? Is it because he has taken a particular unpopular stance, or there are some people out there who are aggrieved who perhaps would not align themselves with some of his policy positions, whichever those policy positions are? On as far as I'm concerned, I'd still like to see a bit of development of those, more clarity rather than ambiguity, especially in the area of so-called radical social transformation. How structured is that? Who are the beneficiaries? Can we come out openly in a more concise way in terms of the modalities that are needed to deliver on that? So I'm not too sure whether there is water to that particular claim.
Mr. Bozangmuila, let me come to you now. Some people have now dismissed Buthelezi's arguments as outrageous. What is your response on that?
Well, Lesego, good evening to the viewers. You know, security measures, you cannot just dismiss them as outrageous. It has been very clear in the country, and we should not underestimate and undermine what the enemies of South Africa and the enemies of radical economic transformation may do in order to derail that process. We will recall historically this country that as much as Chris Heinie, that Buthelezi has compared the current situation to his assassination, was a very disciplined member of the South African Communist Party, or leader of the SACP and member of the ANC. He still allowed the democratic dispensation process and the negotiation process to allow, although he had made it very clear that he's uncomfortable with the process, he doesn't trust the process, and he's not happy with what is happening. There's a documentary that the SABC flagged last year where they showed how Heinie expressed what he was dissatisfied with, but he respected the leadership of the ANC. He accepted a collective decision of the ANC. Now, we cannot underestimate that, because when he expressed his feelings, he was taken out of the way because he was seen as a stumbling block to a negotiated political settlement. Fast forward coming to today, Professor Heinie says evidence must be provided that the life of Mr. Zuma, or the president of the country, has been endangered because of him deciding to roll out the radical economic transformation, which is the policy and the position, is the policy position of the ruling party. What more evidence do we want as a nation when the head of state has been booed, of course, by some of his supposed to be followers and members, has been, you know, never in the history of this country have seen white people and the DA marching against the head of state as much as they were dissatisfied and uncomfortable with Thabo Mbeki and so forth. It has never happened. what more do we want to see when we have seen people not now, not last year, way back in years, 3 or 4 years back, when the president of the country was being booed and then he was being stopped from performing his duties. Now, we cannot underestimate the security measures, but let us go to the issue that the radical economic transformation is Zuma's position. I disagree with that. It is the African National Congress, which is the ruling party, and Seb has correctly said, it started in 2013 when the first statement went out. It just happens that Jacob Zuma happens to be the current leader of the ANC who was brave enough to can stand up and say, let us do this thing that we've been talking about for so many years. So
but now looking at the ANC, will it be possible for the ANC to be able to implement a radical economic transformation if Zuma gets recalled?
Well, whether, you see, a policy position of a political party should not depend on one person who's the leader of the party at that particular day. I've said earlier on, he is the one who stood up and said it publicly as the leader. The ANC has been talking about this at branch levels, at the regional level. They've been talking about this with their alliances, the SACP and COSATU, for many years. But they should not depend on one person to stand up and talk about. If Zuma is being removed, if ANC is a principled organization, whoever takes over should be able to say, this is what we want to do for the black people, poor majority, and landless people of this country. It should not be him. But we should also, make it very clear that when Zuma spoke about this, Tsepo is mentioned in 2013. I want to go back to last year when he was addressing the African National Congress January 8. And this year, he spoke about the stolen land. He spoke about how land this year should be repossessed without a compensation because the willing buyer, willing seller, it didn't work. But that is an ANC position. That's not a Zuma position. Now, we should not underestimate and undermine how the white capital who are benefiting from this whole process, who have been comfortable in this economic process, will not be happy, obviously. Look at the media, look at the newspapers, look at television reports, look at how the ANC is being infiltrated because it is divided, and they are even disregarding within the African National Congress their own policies of the organization to focus on one person named Zuma. It is derailing this process. It is actually said that the white capital and the enemies of this country have been clever. They've used what we call economic askaris to infiltrate the ANC, to make sure that within the ANC itself, because, if you want to destroy the ANC, you don't come from outside and try and attack them. They will destroy you. What the ANC has done successfully for years is, even if they have differences and challenges, when somebody from outside attacks this organization, they team up together against the enemy, which has been the right thing that worked for them. But at the moment, they've been successfully divided by the enemy of the ruling party. They've actually made the biggest tool that the white capital has against the ruling party now. It is the ruling party itself. They've made people within the ANC to turn against their leadership, to even stop talking about the policy position of their own party, to focus on the leader is corrupt, as if there are other people within the ruling party who are not corrupt, as if we don't have cases of corruption and maladministration which were reported in the past. Last week we were sitting here discussing corrupt and illegal and, maladministration activities of the previous ministers of finance, who are ministers that came from the African National Congress, but nobody's talking about that in order to derail this whole process, in order to focus on what the white capital sees as a dangerous leader for them. Zuma is very dangerous for white capital in this country, and I don't want to sit here and discuss his wrongs, his purported corruption, his alleged corruption. That's not what we are discussing. We are discussing him rolling out the policy of the party that has put him into power, and the party members and followers, they do not see that, and that's a sad state of affairs.
And now, Mr. Khadima, just coming to you, do you believe that the vested interests and non-state actors are taking advantage of the divisions within the ANC that Mr. Mwila had also just touched on over there?
Well, first and foremost, they used their limitless financial resources to go and cause that division that we are seeing. All the ructions are based because they are paying for that disunity. They are paying for those factions to continue to be what they are. I mean, it's no different from a country like Congo with vast natural resources can never have peace because they are paying. They are making sure that that country stays divided so that they can, pillage all its natural resources. It's the same case applicable here in South Africa. But I just want to maybe reflect on what Professor Heinie was saying earlier. Now, it's interesting that for him that he is working at an institution that, by the way, pre-1994 used to be having so much properties and so much commercial interest in and around the university. And when there was calls for transformation, what then did is that all of those properties, all of those businesses were sold inexplicably into where those monies, nobody can be able to account for them, where they went. And that was because for the call for transforming the institutions of higher learning, the academic institutions, universities. And I think that Professor Heinie would do well to reflect on that, that his very institution, where he is, to what extent has it been transformed? We must not forget that universities, by the way, they run some of the largest funds in the world. You can look at Harvard University, for example. It's got over $50 billion under management. The University of the Witwatersrand here, I believe, has got over 20 billion rand under management. So the higher institutions themselves, they need to be transformed. All aspects of society needs to be transformed. So all of us, that what we need to do, we should not limit everything else to the one individual being President Zuma. We need to go broad in every sphere where every one of us are having any influence. We have to pursue radical economic transformation, because if we do not do so, our children and our grandchildren will not have a future. That is guaranteed. The stability that we so much take for granted now can be lost in a matter of an hour. We can easily flip back to the era of 1991 to 1994, where 20,000 people lost their lives because to violence, to political violence, because the perpetuators of that violence simply just had no hope in the system that ever was, and they had no hope that the democratic dispensation could usher the stability that we now enjoy. We have to treat this very carefully. Therefore, for example, Mr. Sifiso Buthelezi, who I'm glad that he has recently been appointed the chairman of Public Investment Corporation. That is one of the key institutions that can help us to achieve radical economic transformation. First and foremost, they need to bring back most of the money managed in-house. The other money that they are managing, let them give it to black fund managers. Because in this country, there is no transformation as far as black fund managers are concerned. Of the 7 trillion rand in pensions and savings in this country, that 7 trillion rand, only 4% is managed by few, very few selected black fund managers. So many black talent, black executives that have got experience, that have got expertise in fund management have been excluded because they are starved of the necessary funds that they can manage to then effect the situation of radical economic transformation. So Mr. Buthelezi needs to have nerves of steel at PIC. It must be a non-negotiable that PIC becomes that catalyst for radical economic transformation. But one thing is for sure, he's going to come under so much attack because every good deed will not go unpunished.
Let me just bring in Professor Heinie back into the conversation. Professor, what's your take on some of the points that have been raised so far by the gentleman?
Look, they've raised critical and some obviously, in particular the last point, reference to where I'm at. And it's not for me to deny that reality. But here's the key issue that I have with his whole conversation. Are we clear as to what do we mean by radical socio-economic transformation? For us to refer to historical narratives and by and large your current realities of disadvantaged certain sectors of society against others, issue of disempowerment of blacks over the other races, it's not the issue. For me, the issue is if you say there is this grand scale policy to be unpacked and implemented, what is the content of that? What are the modalities of that? Who should be the main drivers? Perhaps PIC is one such, but if so, what expectations do we have in relation to that? So that we move away from the reality of saying, here lies few black individuals who have benefited, wherein you would expect a class overall to benefit, more people benefiting than few people? All these questions must be answered in this debate.
Yes, Mr. Muller.
Come in there. So, Professor Heinie is asking operational questions. How is this to be done and so forth. The fundamental principle of the economic situation in this country, it lies on three factors. One, it's based on racial color line, and we cannot deny that. We cannot sit here and deny that the reason the majority of the people in this country, who are over 80% black poor people, are racially discriminated and they are racially, economically excluded because of colonialism and apartheid and being landless. That is the first point. The second point is we know that during the apartheid government, coming from 1910 until 1994, they had a 50-year plan that they devised in the 70s to make sure that the white elite and white nations of this country, particularly the Afrikaners, they were given an opportunity to can invest and own land. And when I talk land, I'm talking about reproductive land, I'm talking about economic land, I'm talking about not only of agriculture, I'm talking about mining, tourism land and so forth. White people own that land and they make what? 35%, 35,000 actually white families, they own more than 80% of the land in this country. We cannot undermine that. The third element is we should not shy and sit here and do not talk about how the African National Congress, having had a majority rule under Thabo Mbeki, they have dismally failed to change the constitution of this country to come with an absolute and radical transformation process that says black people are landless and economic land. Black people are still being seen as hard laborers. You find a black graduate having a degree in economics or a national diploma in public management and is sitting as a teller at Spa being supervised by a white boy or a white girl who has turned 8. Those are the real issues. But what we should do in this country, we should make sure that the government, he asked a question, I want to respond to Professor Hanyan. He asked who should be at the helm of transforming this. It should be the government of the day. When you talk of nationalization, and the ANC has purported itself as a nationalist movement, as a movement that believes in African nationalism in this instance, then the government must take ownership of the land for equal redistribution to the people of this country. And maybe when we say land, people think of the hardcore land. I'm talking about land that produces diamonds, gold, platinum, and minerals for equal distribution. Sapa has made an example of an administrative income that the government is sitting, and Sapa it's actually 7.3 trillion, it's not 7 trillion, that the government is sitting on. It's still, all those monies belong to public servants. It's pensions of public servants that over 96% of that is sitting in foreign capital, is sitting in white hands. Those are the kind of processes that government can embark on. We have the supposed to be a central bank, the South African Reserve Bank, which is foreign-owned. It's 63% German-owned. It's white-owned. The Minister of Finance does not really have a say towards what the Reserve Bank does. That's why the Reserve Bank is sitting here today and printing the current currency of the country and notes of the country. They have been printed in German, they have been printed in foreign. Why can't we have a central bank that belongs to the government, that is being controlled and managed from the Ministry of Finance or the Treasury? Why can't we sit and say all this economically productive land that is in the hands of the minority, the ANC has tried.
Unfortunately, I have run out of time, Mr. Muller, but thank you so much for joining us in studio and just unpacking this further for us. That was political analyst Tsepo Kgadima as well as Butsang Muller joining us in studio. And over the phone line, that was Barry Hanyane. He is a political analyst, as we're further just unpacking there that Deputy Finance Minister Sfiso Buthelezi made these startling claims at the Kade's Forum gathering in Pietermaritzburg that President Jacob Zuma is being targeted for his radical transformation agenda. Right now, 8 and 7 Prime. We'll take a short break. We'll be back with more news and updates. Stay tuned.